we're getting nowhere because the thinking that we're using to address the problems is the same thinking that's creating them. And so it's really easy to get distracted by the alarms that are ringing. And like you said, there are many. And that pulls us into reaction mode that has been long steeped in industrial responsiveness, which is to the first order. That is, if if something is happening, we want to stop that thing from happening, whatever it is, whether it's a refugee crisis or a nuclear war threat or a this or a that. And that first order response does not take into account the next and the next and the next order of consequences. So it's a kind of thinking that is very much appropriate for engineering, for building machines, but it's not appropriate for complex living systems in particular.
Welcome to Entangled World, where we explore our interrelated existential, social, economic, ecological, and technological challenges, their underlying drivers, and how a more beautiful world might emerge. I'm your host, Nadia Shaukat Lepson. I'm a daughter of Pakistani Muslim immigrants, a mom, and an intersystems thinker. Join me on a journey to discover what is uniquely and meaningfully ours to do at this pivotal moment in time in service to the sacredness of life. Quick note before we get started, if you haven't already listened to the first full episode of this podcast called What is the Metacrisis? I highly recommend you go back and listen to that first. It's really a foundational episode that provides a lot of the grounding that is important for all the episodes that follow. I'm so excited to share that my guest today is the brilliant Nora Bateson. I am such a Nora fangirl. Her work has been truly life-changing for me. And in fact, doing her warm data host training really shifted something in me and helped me to get unstuck from a rut I had been in for a while. Nora Bateson is an award-winning filmmaker, research designer, writer, educator, international lecturer, as well as the president of the International Bateson Institute based in Sweden. She's also the creator of the warm data theory and practices. Nora's work brings together the fields of biology, cognition, art, anthropology, psychology, and information technology together into a study of the patterns in ecology of living systems. Her work asks the question, how can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within so we may improve our interaction with the world? Nora has written 2 absolutely beautiful, thought-provoking books, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, and her latest book, Combining, where Nora challenges conventional fixes for our problems, highlighting the need to tackle issues at multiple levels, understand interdependence, and embrace ambiguity. Nora and I talk about double binds, which in some cases are similar to multipolar traps or predicaments that feel impossible to get out of, what we might call lose-lose situations. Nora says in these situations, the question becomes, how do we move with our predicament in a way that allows movement? And so we talk about how we can't solve our current global challenges or the meta crisis with direct correctives. Nora says you don't meet something head on, you meet it around, you meet it within, you meet it totally. In ecological systems, nothing is happening one thing at a time. There's not a solution to a problem. We also discuss that while we can point to aspects of the metacrisis with language and statistics and measurements, that the real issues are insidious and underground in our baseline presumptions of what our understanding of what life is. I absolutely loved this conversation, and I hope you do too.
Hi, Nora. How are you today?
I'm really happy to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking time. I'm a huge fan of your work. We met back in July in London
You did.
when I had the absolute privilege of doing your Warm Data Lab host training. And we were just talking about this offline, but even though you had COVID, you guys figured out a creative way to still deliver the training virtually. And it was amazing and it was incredible. And I highly recommend anyone who has an opportunity to do the training to take the time. I promise you, you will not regret it.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. And, many of our listeners know and love your work. And yet, I'd still love to start us off by just asking how you might introduce yourself in this moment.
That's always an interesting question, isn't it?
Yep. And I knew it would be for you.
Mm. Well, it is. It's always an interesting question because I think one of the things I'm most interested in is how in relationship and in our communication we can get out of the habits of putting each ourselves and each other in various reductionist boxes. So I would like to say I'm not sure yet who I am in this conversation because we haven't had the conversation yet.
Hmm.
So that question of, well, who am I when I'm with you? And who are you when you're with me? And what path is open before us? And if I say all of that, then I sound like I'm trying to be extremely vague and cute. And really, I, I might be both, but I'm not trying to be either. Um, because it's actually, I think, important in this moment of trying to get out of orientation to these structures and habits, semantics, um, and 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 epistemological patterns that lock us into the kind of thinking that is the source of the colonial violence and the industrial violence that we're living within. And we do it to ourselves and each other as a courtesy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so this is a difficult one. I get introduced as somebody who makes films and writes books and teaches classes, and I some people like to say that I'm Gregory Bateson's daughter, which all that's totally true. There's a lot more to it than that, I promise you.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are, and I'm really happy to be here with you. How about
I love it. That's wonderful and perfect, as always.
that?
So, we are facing a complex set of entangled global crises, right? Hence the name of this podcast. And whether it's climate change or biodiversity loss or vast income inequality, failing health and education systems, nuclear war risk, like the list is long, right? And many people call this the meta crisis or the poly crisis. And part of why we're in this mess is that, particularly in the West, we've created an industrial society based on mechanistic perceptions of how things work,
Mhm.
right? And so we split issues into categories, we create institutions and separate nonprofits. We hire the smartest people who work really hard to solve these wicked issues. And yet, we are getting nowhere. Why are we getting nowhere?
We're getting nowhere because the thinking that we're using to address the problems is the same thinking that's creating them. And so it's really easy to get distracted by the alarms that are ringing. And like you said, there are many. And that pulls us into reaction mode that has been long steeped in industrial responsiveness, which is to the first order. That is, if if something is happening, we want to stop that thing from happening. whatever it is, whether it's a refugee crisis or a nuclear war threat or a this or a that. And that first order response does not take into account the next and the next and the next order of consequences. So it's a kind of thinking that is very much appropriate for engineering, for building machines, but it's not appropriate for complex living systems in particular. They do not respond at only first order. So if you have a kid that is sick or not doing well in something, you want to make them better and or help them do better at gym class. But the odds are that there are conditions, there are other processes that causality is not singular. And so if you address a problem that's created by a multiple causal process with a singular response, you don't actually do anything but make it worse. And that make it worse is very often ported over to different contexts. So, you might take medications for depression that then reduce your sex life and then your marriage starts to fall apart. So it's not that it didn't address your depression, it's just that something else falls apart that is um, in another context. So this is this transcontextual problem. And eh, honestly, it feels like there has been sort of one of two responses to this for so many years, decades working in this. I get one of two responses. One is, oh, that's too much. We can't possibly take all those contexts into consideration. Okay, well, I don't actually disagree with that, but you can take a lot more than you are
Mhm.
and have a lot more information. And the other one is, well, if we just had a big enough spreadsheet, we could get the data in and then we could get, something like AI or you know, some other computational process in to help us deal with all this complexity because our little brains can't handle it. And my feeling about this is that actually, no, I choose neither of those.
Mhm.
All day, every day, you're actually working and doing life within all kinds of complex relational processes. You don't name them, but you do it. Just being with your kid or walking your dog or gardening or being with your husband or walking into a office building, you are taking into yourself so much information from so many different contexts and it's reverberating and resonating with your own experiences. And you're already there. We're already there. This is how we do it. We're alive. As a living system, you already are complex. The world around you is also complex. So um there's a lot of double binds.
Mhm.
And the double binds are they are creating the experience that it is impossible to sort out the problems that have been created by such entanglement in the past. This feeling like we can't solve this problem or that. We can't undo the ecological issues. We can't undo the the political strife that's in the Middle East. We can't undo that. The history is too long and too rich and too thick and too heavy. The wounds are too deep. We can't undo colonialism.
Mhm.
So that feeling of impossibility then um, puts us in a very difficult moment in the present of recognizing, okay, here we are in this moment. And the time before has brought all these weird configurations that we're living in. And how then do we move with them in a way that allows movement? I'm interested in that. Since
Hmm.
we can't undo it, what does movement from here look like?
I think many of us working in areas of social impact are so focused on how do we create the change? What are the actions that we take? And there was one of the things that you said during the warm data training that I starred and underlined. And you said, there's no such thing as non action,
Mhm,
and that a change in perception is a change in action.
mhm,
And that was like an aha moment for me because oftentimes you think of an action as like I do something and then I see the result from the action. I can discern it, right?
mhm.
And you've created this beautiful new word, which I absolutely love, aphanipoesis. It just rolls off the tongue, aphanipoesis. I love it. Which means a coalescing of unseen factors toward vitality. And you say it's unseen, but it's not hidden. It's just out of our habituated perception. And so I guess my question is how do we continually expand our perception? Right? Like we can't predict the nth order effects of our actions. We can't take into account every single factor that might influence it. But I think we can expand our perception, and so how do we do that? How do we get into a habit of doing that?
Mhm. Well, there are some things that you can do. I mean, it's a practice, I would say. Um, the process that I developed called the Warm Data Lab or the People Need People processes are both absolutely created to allow for new perceptions to bubble up between old ones. Um, that those processes um, are made for that. But there's a lot of other ones. I think that it's also important to be around people who are from different cultures, who you may have really unexpected misunderstandings with.
Hmm.
And that feeling of disorientation of, well, I thought this was the situation. And what I find in those moments is that my own cultural expectations are invisible to me until I am reflected back that somebody else sees something very differently. And then I realize, oh, this is one of 1 million presuppositions I'm carrying that are only baked in my cultural experience. This is not how life is,
Yeah.
right? So that experience of being dislodged or disoriented from the way you think life is very important for this sensitivity. Another way to do that is, of course, with art and music, because art and music, well, art is music and music is art, but the arts pull us into ways of perceiving that are nonverbal and that integrate all the various processes of our sensitivities, particularly art that you don't understand
Mm. Mhm.
is important. Um, and then also, I would say playing with synesthesia.
Mm.
So those moments when you might just challenge yourself from time to time. What does that texture of wood down like? What is the way that I would draw the flavor of that soup? What is the way that I might um, give words to the rhythm of those boiling bubbles? Okay, so these processes where you're crisscrossing your sensory habits. And this is important as a practice because our senses get habituated. And we see this in exercises all the time where there's some unexpected thing that occurs in the screen and no one sees it because they weren't looking for it.
Mhm.
And so I think we should just take for granted from go that there's an awful lot happening that we are not perceiving. And so how that attention to our own perception and watching out for those places where we've been so grooved in because school, because life, because language, because culture, because all sorts of things. So how to shake those grooves. And they but the thing is they need to be met in ways that are not exactly direct corrective. So in
Mhm.
each of these examples, what I'm suggesting is a exercise or a process, a practice out here, but what's actually happening in your sensory processes, woo, that's up to them. That's up to your own body knowledge, your own cultural impressions, your dream world, your right? These places that are so deep down, there is no language there. And And so I think that in my estimation, even though we can point with language and statistics and all sorts of measurements to all the aspects of what we might call the meta crisis or the poly crisis, the real issues are insidious. They're underground. They're down in our baseline premises of understanding what life is and what it means to ask what's in it for me. What's the
Mm.
point of this? Where is this going? What am I going to get out of this? Right? These type of questions that have to do with, in some way, embellishing our individual um, take back are deeply and totally unecological responses. So they're disrupting our possibility for perception.
Mhm. Yeah, I always say that the most dangerous question in the English language is what's in it for me. There's so much in that one.
It's so much there. Or what's the point?
Yeah.
And what's the point is a question that leads you immediately to a linear causal derivative, or deliverable that's going to be a takeaway. What's the point? What am I gonna get out of this? It's the same question, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the point? Um,
Yeah.
something a meadow never asks,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you talk about art and music and poetry and the blending of these different sort of mediums of communication to communicate.
Mhm.
And it's one of the things in your this wonderful, beautiful book that you've just written combining. One of the things I love about it is it's just it's not a book. It's like a juicy experience. You go through it and there's beautiful images and there's poetry and there's things written upside down and it's amazing. So thank you so much for writing it, first of all. I'd highly recommend everybody go out and get the book. And there's this piece in your book called Tearing and Mending. And in it you write, in the singularity of its mission to hastily fix one malady at a time, the cure may be more harmful than the wound.
Mhm.
You say most identified problems as they have emerged are really the consequence or symptoms of other conditions. The solution to the consequence is likely to perpetuate the actual problem.
Mhm.
And so I was thinking about this, and I think an example of this might be the Green Revolution, right? We were trying to solve the problem of world hunger. And so we started using a ton of pesticides to grow food, and it worked in terms of volume of food produced. But now we have degraded soils, we have foods with low nutrient density, we have pesticide runoff in oceans that are causing, that are killing fish and causing algal blooms. And so the solutions often cause the problems. And so, and this is such a hard thing to get, especially if you are somebody who's working in systems change or you're trying to do something good for the world. Like, how do we go about creating social change when it feels like anything you do will have negative, unintended consequences that you can't possibly perceive? It can be paralyzing. How do you go about doing anything?
Mhm. Well, I think, first of all, there's no action that is every action is an action, even a non-action. So you
Hmm.
are doing something. The question is, what are you doing? And I think it's important to I want to put two images side by side for you here. And one of them is the Sustainable Development Goal logo. Okay.
Hmm.
And here you have these brightly colored boxes, and each one has a little logo inside that has a label. And one is, life on land, life in the water, equality, no poverty, no hunger, or whatever. There's 17 of them, well-being. And just notice that for a moment. And notice, what does this image tell us about the culture into which it is being placed, into which it resonates? What does it tell us? We like little boxes.
Hmm.
We like things that are labeled.
Yep. And they're
This,
neat little categories.
right, this looks like practicality to us. This looks like action. This looks like possibility. Um, and then I want to put next to it another image. And that image, I'd like you to imagine a mother nursing her baby. Okay. And in that second image, notice that in order to feed the babies, in order to have that relationship, which is nutritional, emotional, intellectual, it's feeding both people's nervous system, um, as well as lots of other systems, metabolisms, and so on. Um, in order to have that happen, the mother has to breathe clean air and have clean water. In order to feed the babies, we have to have mothers and fathers that can actually take care of the land, the water, they can't be going hungry. They can't be dying of poverty. They can't be in a state of non-well-being. And they have to be able to feed the babies, 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 babies. We are mammals. If we do not feed the babies, our species goes. It's basic. This image of a mother feeding her baby is every single one of those sustainable development goals in another form. There are probably many other things that you could look at that would also hold all of the goals in them in one image. Um, but they look nothing like that blocked grid. Okay. That blocked grid, which is also so much like the way a school system works, or the way an economy works, or the way a political system works, or a healthcare process works. So I just want to put those next to each other, because I think if we're standing in the grid saying, how do we fix the grid? We're probably asking the wrong question. I think what we're actually looking for is a completely different kind of approach that works like nature works. And in that, I mean, the elegance of the breast that is warm and soft, that produces this incredible nutritional milk that is actually also filled with um, some of the worst chemicals and pollutants.
Mhm.
Um, that there is this noticing of how in ecological systems nothing is happening one thing at a time. That's not the solution to one problem, right? This
Yeah.
the continuation of the species, it's the emotional building of connection, it's physical, it's emotional, it's even microbiome biological, right? The various microbes are also being shared for immunity and all sorts of other things. So I think this is where we get into trouble, is trying to solve problems in isolated ways. Now, I'll tell you what doesn't work though is clumping 3 SDGs together and thinking, okay, well now we're going to do like nature because we're going to clump 3 of them together or 4, and then
Mhm.
we'll be doing systems work.
Mhm.
And then what you end up with is this, what we need is a bigger um, spreadsheet. And that's not it. So, I mean, let's take it this way. Let's think of a song that's a favorite song. And then what if I ask you to say, okay, now let's pull out all the A notes. Let's pull out all the B notes. Let's pull out all the sharps. Let's pull out all the G notes. And then we'll count them. And then we'll know what we need to know about how to fix this song. It's ludicrous, right? So where
Yeah.
is the actual music taking place? And what does the music do in your body? What does it allow you to imagine, to feel, to find expression for in life? And these things are so far out of reach of this way of dealing with first order mechanistic industrial communications, which is why in combining, I tried to bring as much different texture, rhythm, um, metaphor, tone, atmosphere, um, vibe as possible. Style. Some of it's very, very personal. Some of it's not. Some of
Mhm.
it's super theoretical. Some of it's seemingly silly. Some of it is absolutely nonverbal. Some of it's surreal, actually.
Mhm.
And that's because I'm wanting to allow that part of you that makes connections, that combines things. That's why it's called combining, because you, as a reader, are combining. Just like you do when you listen to a piece of music, it's you that's combining those experiences, those notes, those rhythms in you. Or if you experience a piece of art or walk through the forest or whatever.
Mhm.
So actually, I don't know. It's a tall order that I'm asking for right now, which is really a completely different approach. And it's
Yeah.
so unfamiliar to people that they often think that I'm being capricious or that I'm acting from some sort of privilege of not having to feel the pain of that hunger or the loss of my children or being in a political war zone. That these are the ruminations of somebody who can ruminate in this way. But I actually just want to say that it's on the contrary, that I believe this to be a far more practical approach. That it's very abstract to break life into boxes and create supposedly linear causal processes. That's very abstract if you look at it from the perspective of how life works. So the idea that actually approaching from a way that stitches life together and allows for a continued stitching together, combining and healing, that that's not abstract. But it's just so unfamiliar that it sounds abstract. A lot of times when people say that's abstract, what they mean is, "I don't get it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think about when babies are born, right? They are just naturally taking in the world, right? Before they have language, they don't separate things into little things and label them and say this is this and this is that. They're just sort of like taking it all in.
Mm.
And in some ways, I wonder if just even the move to verbal language started to create some of the roots of the separation. Like we live in a deeply separated and divided world. And there are certain languages like English that are much more individualistic, that aren't as relational. One of the things I was thinking about, so we grew up speaking Urdu in my household. And one of the things growing up that I thought was silly, but now I think is amazing, is that Urdu has different words for an uncle on your mom's side
Oh,
of the
what
family versus an uncle on your dad's side
also
of the family, right? And so, come from a big family, lots of cousins, and so there were all these different names to keep track of and to figure out who to call what. And when I was younger, I thought that was so silly. Like, oh, why do we make it so complicated? In English, it's just aunt and uncle and it's simple. And now I see the beauty in that because it's describing a relationship
Mhm,
in that word.
mhm,
And so, um, you look to certain indigenous languages that are much more relational in the ways in which uh, just how things are labeled and how things are,
mhm,
there's words that describe experiences. Arabic, the same thing. And so part of me wonders, we live in a world where English is the dominant language, and it is a language that tends to veer more towards separation. And is that part of the problem that we're facing?
Oh, undoubtedly, that's part of the problem. And then add the fracturing of our sense-making processes that are happening via technological algorithms, which have separated things in another language. Um, and the way in which there is just the assumption that, yeah, you know, language class is different than math class, is different than art class, is different than history class. How is that possible, actually?
Mhm. Yeah.
So we are just living in a world, you were talking about when a baby is born, they're just taking things in. And I love to think about that moment of pure possibility for what life might be.
Mm.
That baby could be born in an era 10,000 years ago and would be coming into its world, learning to make sense of the relationships and the way that you survive in this world and what is the logic of this world. And that logic is very different in different places. What's the grain in the wood here? What's the hum of this song? And they're learning it through language, through responses with people, through communication, through relationship with the seasons and so on, food, ritual, um, and so I guess why I like to think about that is because I feel like it loosens up um, what could be. Let's open up some possibilities here. And I often feel that there's a kind of tyranny of cynicism that holds the idea that, yeah, but this world that we live in, this is how life is.
Mm, mhm.
And so you can't question this because this is how life is. I mean, there are governments and this is how they work. And we have an economy. And if you don't understand economics, just keep your mouth shut because this is how
Mhm.
it is. You're not a doctor. You don't know what you're talking about. So just don't because this is how it is. And and then in the same breath, we're thinking we need to make systems change. We've got to have epistemological change. We've got to have, entirely different habits of cognition. And yet this is how life is. And so for me, I think it's really important to to tickle that, to loosen it, to start to approach things in really different ways because you get really different responses. And then things are shifting. There it is. There's movement. But I'm looking for the movement.
How do we sort of cultivate an intuition for complex systems, right? For those second, third, nth order effects, how do we get the you always say get it in your elbows, right? How do we get it into our elbows?
Practice.
Mm.
It's just practice. And I think it's practice all day, every day. Every relationship, every conversation. Every time you look in the mirror, every time you make a cup of tea, every time you say hello to somebody, every time your every communication is the practice.
I often think being a mother or being a parent is one of the best ways to get practice in this because as a parent, there's so many things that you're navigating. When that child is born, you're trying to figure out how to keep it alive and how to feed it and all the growth and development and are they hitting their milestones and da 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 da. And and you're paying close attention, I think, to how you're communicating with that child because you want to be a good parent. You want to raise them in the right way. And I always say that my son has been my greatest teacher.
Which
He's
yeah,
he's not been the easiest child for sure. We've had lots of challenges. He had a lot of medical challenges, but he's very opinionated. He's 5 years old and he's very strong and he knows what he wants and I've had to figure out how do I how do I move with this? Sometimes he can be very rigid and I've had to figure out like how do I loosen this up a little bit? And I have to come at things in different ways, right? Like when it's time to go to school and it's okay, let's put your boots on. It's time to go to school. No, no, I don't want to. If I keep pushing him to put his boots on, guess what? He's never going to put his boots on. So now I got to come up with some other way, right? And so I think about things like that. And oftentimes, most people wouldn't say that sort of thinking in complexity or in
mm,
systems thinking, but I think it is. I think that's in the moment you're working it out, you're figuring out, you're coming at it from different perspectives, you're looking at it in different ways. You're trying to put yourself in that person's shoes and trying to say, okay, why is he being difficult today? What's going on today? Like all these things. And it's about the relationship. It's very relational.
because it matters. And I think one of the things that you're describing is what it looks like to try to do something without breaking something else.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is that second order thinking. So you could say, you know, damn it, we're going to stand here until you put those boots on. And if you don't put them on, I'm going to chop your head off. Right. And he would eventually put them on and you would win, but you would lose.
Right. At what cost?
Right.
Yeah.
So there it is. That's that thing of because of the relationship and because you are in a loving and also, let's face it, if you create a traumatized child, you then have to have the capacity for dealing with the traumatized child.
Mhm.
So it's not just out of benevolence to him, but also that it's a lot easier to be in relationship with someone for the rest of your life that that you haven't damaged.
Yeah. That's, like, the greatest fear as a parent,
Of
like, "Let me
course.
not damage my child."
Yes, how can I please not have them hate me when I'm 15 and 16, and I really wanna get to know my grandkids, so if I can just get through this. But I think that's just it. It's the wanting to not make harm. We need to do some things, but we don't want to create the consequences of the damage. So how do we do what we need to do in ways that go around, that are not direct correctives? It's only gonna be industrial mechanistic processes that are super direct. Um, but let me make a caveat on that because you can also have, like, a medical emergency where someone's bleeding out and you have to make a response. But even in that medical response, it matters what the EMT practitioner is perceiving in the person. What are they perceiving? How are they perceiving that being? And that because the way that they touch them, the way they talk to the other EMT teammates, the way that they are the tempo they move him with, whatever it is, that communication is gonna run through, and that's kinda what we're talking about, right? The communication I feel when you're standing at the door with your 5-year-old that won't put his boots on is also you're kinda being tested. So what is the communication that runs through here?
Mhm.
What is it? What is the hum in our song, mom? How do things work around here?
Mhm.
And when I think about just some of the simple things of the way in which so much parenting in at least on in some parts of the world has looked like punishment and reward. And then the difficulty that surfaces in adult life with dealing with any kind of criticism or confrontation.
Mhm.
And we think, oh, these are unrelated, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to that question of what's in it for me,
Yeah.
right? If you are raised in a sort of reward punishment environment, that question is always gonna be on your mind.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's the wrong reason. I mean, what is the reason for putting your boots on in the morning? If you don't wanna go to school, you'd rather stay home, and you know that once those boots are on, you're on your way out the door one way or another. Why would you wanna put your boots on? And in the end, it's gonna come down to his relationship with you. I'm gonna put my boots on because 'cause I'm here with my mom and we gotta go,
Yeah.
you know? But that sort of rationality is not met head on.
Mm.
You know, that's something that is it's a logic that lives in an poetic realm. It's it's another place. So what I hear is this beautiful sort of searching for a way into another kind of communication that might open the door, right? And when you
Mhm.
look then at combining, you'll see that's exactly what I'm doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So many different kinds of communications. Hopefully, they'll open different doors. And when the doors start opening, maybe some cross breezes will begin. Maybe there'll be some cross fertilizations. Maybe there'll be some storms that can brew in there. But there's movement instead of just stuck at the door with no boots on.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of kids too, so I've been spending quite a bit of time in my life at the door with the boots. I yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah, I love how you often talk about that we have to meet the challenge
mm,
and not match it. And this is like it's so slippery. It can be such a slippery concept because it means different things in different situations. It's not like a rule. It's not like here's I can tell you what to do in the situation. You've gotta feel your way through what that means. And we all want the answer. We all wanna know what is the thing to do?
Yeah. And y so that meet not match chapter is a
Mhm,
hard chapter,
mhm.
but I tried to actually make it as friendly as possible, um, with stories, and one of those stories is the story of getting lost in
I
Argentina.
love that story. Tell that story because I love that story.
That the story is, I guess I was in outside the city of Buenos Aires with my 2 kids, and they were quite young. And we were visiting a friend on a Sunday, and we took a taxi out to her house, and what we didn't actually realize was that there weren't gonna be any taxis available to go home on a Sunday afternoon, and the buses were gonna be few and far between, and we didn't know how to take the buses, and actually, we didn't have any cash on us. So we got on a bus outside her house, not really knowing how to get home, and the bus started going in some direction, and I realized this is the wrong direction. Uh-oh. And we don't have any more money for the next bus, and, oh, no, it's Sunday, and everything's closed, and, um, so eventually here I am I'm with my little kids, and I was like, "Alright, so guess what, guys? We're lost." And I was like, "Look out the window and see if there's anything you remember, and can you check your pockets and your backpacks and see if you guys have any coins? Because I don't have any money for the next bus." Anyway, so between us, we started this sort of we entered the realm of, "And now we are lost together." And, we managed to get enough money to get on another bus, sort of, and then it was going wrong way too. And then we got off that bus and it began to pour rain, like pour incredible amounts of water falling out of the sky. So we ran into this little restaurant and then the restaurant we sat down and we had something hot to drink and dried off a little bit. I mean, I have to this day no idea where we were at that moment. And then the guy at the restaurant was so cool, and he let us charge a little extra money so that we could get on the next bus, and he told us which bus we could get on, so I used my credit card, and he put a little extra charge on and then gave me the cash, and that bus never came, so we ended up still lost. Finally, we ended up somewhere, and Trevor looked out the window at my little son, and he said, "There's the zoo! I have been to the zoo!" And so we got off, and we went to the zoo. And when we got to the zoo, we knew where we were. We were still a long way from home. So, but there were taxis there at the zoo. And so we got in a taxi and we talked to the taxi driver and explained what had happened. And he looked at us like, "Are you out of your mind? What is going on here?" And so he said, "Look, I'll take you to the ATM machine that's open and you can get the cash and you can pay me and then I'll take you home." So we had this whole adventure. We ended up in all these places we never would have been to. We did not ever figure out which bus would have been the right bus. Um, but we learned how to be lost together.
Mm,
And that have felt ever since that day was one of the most important days of this thing we call parenting.
mm,
Of there's a lot of things that I will never be able to teach my children. I will never be able to give them the bus schedules of every city in the world so that they don't get lost. But I can embody with them the process of figuring it out when you don't know and making relationships with people you probably wouldn't have met before and figuring out solutions to things in the moment. Um, and that being lost together allowed for us to learn together, allowed for my kids to see me not being the one, "Mommy doesn't know everything,"
mhm,
right? And it was really, really beautiful what happened with us that day. So another piece that's in that is actually my, husband and my wedding vows.
Mm.
So that piece is in there because, again, we were sort of asking the question before we got married. We had both been married before, and we knew that, marriage doesn't actually make it work. So what and we knew also that we were getting married in a different sense. We weren't he had his kids, I had my kids. So we were starting life in another place. And after studying quite a bit of complexity and systems work, you got to ask yourself the question, what do you actually want someone to promise you?
Mhm.
Like
I love
where
this piece, yeah.
where do you put the promise? And so very often that promise is at the 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 level of match, okay? I want you to be with me forever. So promise me you're going to be with me forever,
Mhm.
right? I want you to respect me. So promise me you're going to respect me. Um and our vows are very different to that. And what we actually noticed that we wanted, let me see. What we actually noticed that we wanted, is the last part of this chapter. This is not an easy chapter, but I can't believe.
I loved the vows that you guys wrote. They were so beautiful.
Um, yeah, okay. Um, let's see, where is it? Okay, yeah. I will promise you these things. These are the words that we said to each other. I promise to show you my whole self in so much as I can. I promise to speak and be in truth with you. I will not hide anything in so much as I can. I promise to learn with you and from you. I will share incomplete ideas and unknown feelings with you so that you know where I am, even when I'm lost. I choose you. So there was something built into our marriage that was actually about meeting that way in which, if I love you, I want your time that you are alive to be as full and as beautiful as it can be. I want that
Mhm.
for you. And I want you to want that for me. And so if that means that you need to go, then I want you to go.
Mhm.
So I don't really want someone to promise me they're going to be with me forever.
Yeah.
What I want is for the forever that I have right now to be beautiful. And that infinity of time is actually already here. So if the path moves along and there's a need for change, the last thing on earth I really want my partner to do is to squish himself into a relationship with me that is limiting who he can be.
Mm.
I tried that. It no, no, no. That just makes really weird things happen, and there are all sorts of consequences, and they pop out all over the place, and
Yeah,
so
nth order effects.
so so what do you want someone to promise you? And I think that that's one of those meet not match questions. But for me, this again, so the SDGs are a match. What are the problems? There they are. They're in the boxes. If you look at the woman nursing her baby, that's the meat. How do you meet those? You don't meet something head on.
Head
You
on, yeah.
meet it around. You meet it from within. You meet it totally. So what we're constantly looking for is solutions that match the problem. This is the problem, this is the match. So if the problem is poverty, add money, right? That's a
Yeah.
match.
Yeah.
If the problem is, war, then you have to demand peace. But that's not how that works. If the problem is the kid won't put the boots on, then you have to demand they put the boots on. No. So when you're dealing with living systems, you have to be careful that you don't get caught in engineering responses.
There's a lot of talk these days about imagining new systems, right? New ways of organizing humans, new forms of democracy, new economic systems, new education systems. And that, people say if we can't imagine it, then we can't create it. And there's this piece in your book called A Letter to My Imagination. And there's this wonderful line that you say, please don't send the imagination ambassador from the Department of Human Assumption. Send the other one who lives in the creative belly of evolution. I love that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because there is so much talk about imagination these days, is what is the tricky thing about trying to imagine a new future for civilization?
It's the problem that you can't be sure that your imagination isn't actually informed by all the experiences and ways of knowing that are creating the problem in the first place. That's the problem.
Mhm.
I mean, have you ever had this, you know, really strong intuition and then you're like, "Oh, actually, it was PMS." And then you have intuition that's like, so it comes from the center of the earth, and you're like, "No, now this is intuition," and it is.
Hmm.
And these words, and intuition and imagination, both suffer from this confusion and conflation of not having a separate entity that we can identify that is the one that is actually coming from our deep connection with life, as opposed to just another manifestation out of the cauldron of our experiences that are just churning around. So, most of the time, our imaginative world is actually just churning and rehashing the old stuff. And so, even in the question, how do we imagine a new education system? Do you sense any problem in the question?
Yeah.
So it's
There's first of all, there's an assumption that it's a system, that it's an education system that is
exactly.
kind of standardized, right?
I mean, for me, the question would be looking very differently. Like, what do our kids need?
Yeah.
How can we give our kids something we don't know yet? So, because they need to be in a world that we've never been in. So we have to be really careful what we teach our kids about how the world is, because they're listening. They're watching us. They're watching how we get lost. They're watching how we deal with brute issues at the door. They're watching us. And what are we telling them about how life is? So for me, that's where I would point that question. But that doesn't even look like the same question.
Mm. Mhm.
So so I think I spend quite a bit of time honestly rolling my eyes at all this imagination work, because what I see coming out of it and the tone that it's taking place in is completely paced. It's not alive. It's not surreal. It's not sourcing from that place. It's a bunch of people in a conference center with Post-its and whiteboards trying to strategize, which is actually not an ecological process. So I really long for imagination in this moment, but I find it in other places. There's a lot of imagination coming out of all kinds of incredible music, theater, poetry, out of the everything from the hip hop culture to um, actually a lot of the kind of indie films coming out of India. I mean, incredible stuff happening, but it's not calling itself imagination work,
Mhm.
and it's not calling itself systems change work. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the second that you say we're gonna get into a room and we're gonna imagine something different, like, you've lost it,
It went
right?
away. It was hard.
It just went away.
Oh, well, it's so tragic because actually the intent is so pure,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
heart and the minds and the I mean, I don't wanna be in a mockery place with this because it's really quite serious, and I think that at heart, the sentiment is the same sentiment that I'm holding, which is actually that in order to get to something new, we're gonna have to actually be able to let go of the habits that we're in, and for a lot of people, that letting go requires something else to hold on to,
Yeah.
right? And so I think the longing for to cast that vision of what we could do and then go toward it is really just that thing of letting go of one side of the pool so we can get to the other.
Yeah, it's like that longing for certainty, right?
And so
We wanna be certain that we know the direction that we're going. We're so afraid to just trust that we can figure it out, but I think that part of that is that you need to have the relationships and the trust there with the people that you're on the journey with to feel like you can get to wherever you're trying to go, and if that's not there, then I can understand that, like, desire for wanting the certainty.
yeah, it's just that if you're using your imagination to get an
Mm.
effect, you're in a linear relationship with that. If it's, "Let's get together and make art and be imaginative, and we'll see what happens," then there's an opening for what is actually alive to start opening up pathways.
Mhm.
But the second it's 2 and the urgency of our time is making everything into a linear causal emergency that needs to have some sort of agency and action and effective response and practicality and
Mhm.
mhm.
Perpetuating more of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is an urgency to be lost together. And
And I think this is one of the things that I loved so much about the warm data training, and having so talk about that a little bit for folks who don't know what warm data is or what the warm data training is, because I think it was just such an incredible experience to be able to be there for a week and to engage in multiple different warm data lab sessions and some of them with different people. And I don't know if I told you this, but there was one night after I left, I went to a I wanted to have dinner by myself and kinda decompress, and I went to this Thai restaurant, and I started having dinner, and I pulled out my notebook, and all of a sudden, I started writing poetry.
mm,
Nora, I haven't written poetry in years, and something was just coming out onto the page, and I don't know where it came from, but it was this amazing thing that just sort of happened, and it was and I think it was because of the warm data lab. I think it was because of the experiences and something was moving and something was shifting. But so, yeah, so tell us a little bit about that for anybody who's not familiar with the work, because I just think it's so important. It's so important.
thank you for saying that, and I love that that's what happened, And it's my favorite response to combining is when I hear from people, I got your book and I love it. And I've been writing ever since I got it. And there it is. That's the second order thing that I'm talking about.
Mm.
It's not just about writing a book. It's about the writing is opening up a kind of communication that people are pouring into. There's some expression that's just longing to come through that. And so I love that it happened with you also. So the warm data training course is a course. I love that course. I love that course so much. And it's it's work. It's not an easy course. It's
Yeah.
it's a lot of theory in that course, but a lot of story too.
Mhm.
And basically, it's a each day is a bringing to in of one or two pieces of theory um, that are underpinning the practice of the warm data lab, which can, if you're not really familiar with the theory under it, it can look like it's really just, some people sitting in chairs and there's some paper and you just walk around. Um, but I have felt that it was really needed to share the theory that is underpinning that process so that hosts that are using the warm data process understand how delicate and how beautiful and how potent the way that impressions that are not told how they should have outcomes, allowing a wildness to come into people's way of combining their experiences and not tell them that they have to make an outcome. Um, that these impressions are mostly things that you didn't say, ways that you didn't express yourself, the story you didn't tell, the person you didn't sit with. That these deep shifts that we're actually working with are subtle and very, very important. So the course is several days, and each day there's lots of stories and a couple pieces of theory, and then an afternoon of doing warm data lab, so you can see the theory in practice. Um, and then the online course works pretty much the same way. Um, this course for me was really an interesting thing to bring into the world because in my lifetime, I was born into a family in which these theories were being held. So I have a kind of unique experience of living into them as a way of life prior to learning the jargon and the vocabulary and the authorship and the the timelines and the um so if I were to have learned that theoretical work in a university, I might have be teaching it in a really different way. But because for me, I learned it at a very young age, um, in life, the tone and the holding of that theory and the way in which the theories shape each other and bounce off each other is what's interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of people who don't love theory are in there learning to love theory with me.
Mm.
And a lot of people who do love theory are loving the theory coming in a different tonality. Um, but it's not a lightweight course, and it's just kind of merciless in the different directions from which we come about revealing how and where these processes of knowing and recognizing how life makes more life. And what does it mean to be in membership with those processes of how life makes more life? So that is something that it kind of stems from my frustration of how easy it is to say, "Oh, we're all interconnected. It's all interdependent.
Mhm.
We're all one." And then it's like, actually, this is really hard work.
Mhm.
And what is under this is not just being able to say those words, but being able to live into them. Um, and that's rigor. Um, and rigor in the sense of practice, rigor in the sense of continued exploration and inquiry, rigor in the sense of integrity. Yeah, integrity is a big piece of this for me. And I don't want to pick and choose the theories that allow me to keep my hypocrisies. Okay.
Mm.
Because what I see so often is that the really difficult aspect, like abductive process, which is a theory from Charles Saunders Peirce, is one of the pieces of systemic theory that is it's that uncle that doesn't get invited to Christmas party. Because he always drinks too much and insults everybody, right? And that's
Mhm.
the problem with abductive process is it actually really renders notions of agency and linear causality and strategy to be quite impractical in living systems. And for those that don't aren't familiar with that term, it's a big piece of theory and we don't have time to touch it here. But essentially, it's let's think of it as the way one context makes it possible to describe or understand another. So the
Mhm.
way the education system is a description of the economic system, but the education system is also a description of the family system and the culture and the history. And history is a description of the education system and the economy. And all of these systems are actually describing and shaping each other. And then I want to ask you, where's the change?
Mhm.
Where's the action? Where are you going to come into this membership here? Um, and and that's the same question as that, mother nursing her baby question of what does it look like to enter into these systems with a totally different approach?
Yeah, I think of it one way that I think of this is how the new gets in. We were talking about imagination, right? And it's like, how does something new get in?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the question because we are constantly in our habituated processes, but we're also all changing. So It the new will come, and especially, I think with Peirce, he talked about the fact that in that process of making a hypothesis, so if I understand what's happening in or I have some experience of something happening in the educational context, I go to another context and I can perceive things, and I make a hypothesis of what's happening there based on what I have known from over here. Now perfectly, beautifully, exquisitely, my hypothesis is not correct. It's a little bit correct. It's a little bit not correct. And in that, there's a gap. There's a mishap. There's a little bit of a scrambling of what could have been in a machine a perfect mechanized process. But in this, it is not. There's a looseness, and the way you might perceive and make that hypothesis would be different than me. So again, we have a little bit of air. Some air gets in, right? Have you ever been in communication with someone who doesn't completely speak the language that you're speaking, and they say something wrong, and you understand it in some way that they didn't mean?
Yeah.
Suddenly, you're like way off in space, but actually, something really cool just came out of that, right?
Yeah.
Or you're cooking something and you screw it up, but it becomes something beautiful. So it's that way in which this, you know, that expression that the reach should exceed the grasp, where there's a little bit of room where something new can get in.
I've been thinking about this idea of how something new comes in the context of how organizations
Mm.
operate, right? I think one of the problems we're facing is that we've built organizations that are very mechanistic in the ways that they tackle the issues that they're trying to tackle, right? We've talked about silos between organizations, but inside organizations, we create these hierarchical structures, we define,
Yeah.
what success looks like in different roles, we create performance management systems and define metrics, and we end up creating these toxic organizations that perpetuate much of the alienation and the problems that we see in the world. And one of the things that I'm really curious about is how, and this is, I suppose, a much more practical question, but how do we create organizations that don't do that? When you set out to create the Bateson Institute, how did you think about these things? How it would be structured, how it would work, what its culture, its like way of being in the world?
So people have been asking about how to create a cybernetic or systemic organization since the
Mhm.
Macy conferences. And those were in the 50s. And as far as I can see, no one's ever successfully done it. And there's been a whole lot of talk about it. Um, how do we make an organization more like an organism?
Mhm.
Right. And in our work, there's a few things that we have done that are kind of radical. But I think the most radical thing is that we have not set out to know what we're doing.
Mm.
I mean, there's no one who really has a role per se. There are things that people tend to be the one that they end up doing it. Like Euron tends to be the one who deals with the taxes because he can actually read the Swedish tax form. Tends to be the one
Makes
doing
sense.
that. I tend to be the one that teaches the classes because I tend to be the one that teaches the classes. Um, but the main thing is we did not start out with any prefabricated mission statement of what this thing was.
Mm.
So it's been in a state of becoming constantly and us figuring out how to respond to that coming. Now, that's not exactly easy stuff. It's frustrating. And sometimes it's really, really hectic. Okay. So I come from a background of independent filmmaking and art projects and working in media. So I'm really I actually in this maybe it's not even healthy. I don't know, but I love being in production and that feeling of, okay, let's just do this till it's done. I'm super tired. Let's just keep going. Uh, But it takes a long time to get to the place of being in production. You do a lot of work before you're actually in production. So I like to have a schedule that has open space and slow moments and then kicks into high gear for 11 hours. Right. So I'm not looking for the 9 to 5 block with a role and a precise job description. I'm looking for that ecology of possibility that happens when we are doing things that we're not familiar with and someone's covering for someone and somebody's around. That's been another thing that we have tried to put in the fore is recognizing that actually everyone is dealing with very intense life stuff.
Hmm.
And that in most professional circumstances, that would be put over there. You shouldn't bring that in. And we said no to that. Like, we're not in a place in history where that's going to work. Um, we started off our conversation before we turned the record button on talking about caregiving. And the fact that you have to actually take time off work to care for people, to do the things that create life. Okay, this tells you everything you need to know about the problem.
Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah,
It's insane.
to bring a child into this world, to help a parent out of this world, to take care of your body, to take care of your garden, to take care of your house, anything that you're taking care of is money you're not making, is professionalism you're not producing, is blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's work you're not doing. It's so how what is that way in which our own organizations and our way of being can start with that? Let's don't put that second, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. 'Cause that is life. Like, that is the reason we're here. Those are the things that we should be tending to.
Right.
Not right? And it's yeah.
Yeah. So how to take care of each other so that as we take care of each other. The presupposition or the assumption might be that if you do that, no one's going to ever get any work done and that you will fall behind and you won't be very productive. And all I can tell you is if that's the case, it hasn't hit us yet. Because seemingly not knowing where you're going and putting caregiving first has made us so incredibly busy. I've never had a more productive year in my life. So,
Mm,
whatever's happening there, we're keeping it. We're sticking with it.
I love it. I love it. I know we're a little bit over time. Do you have just a few more minutes?
I do.
Okay. Amazing. So, we've been talking about caregiving and parenting, and something I think a lot about because I do have a 5-year-old
Well,
is this world that he's growing up and into,
mhm.
right? And how do we prepare our children for this world of meta crisis, this world of poly crisis? What can we do now as parents, as teachers, as adults to help support them in what they're going to be facing, what they are facing?
Well, I mean, I've been asking this question since before my babies were born, and they are now in their 20s. And it's only the beginning. So
Mhm.
I I mean, I think that the one of the things that I have worked with them with was around how to live in two worlds. One world that is the world that is this existing systems where you get grades and you get jobs and you pay tax. Another world where you're actually tending relational process and you understand that those things that will generate life are outside of the other things that you're doing. And
Mm.
and so this may seem like it's some sort of fractured um reality to dump on your child, but I just have to say that it's what's real. And they had to kind of figure that out on their own as well. You know, the conversations that we could have at home and the way that we did mutual learning together and how we got lost together was a very different kind of communication than the way they were with their teachers in school. Right. So, how you
Mm.
are in relationship intergenerationally is also really different with some people than with others. And I think for me, the main thing is just, I mean, I'm asking the question constantly, how are we going to improvise together? Because neither one of us knows where we're going. So, how do we improvise intergenerationally into being in a future that isn't here yet? What are you going to bring with you? What do you need to do? What do you need to have in your relationship that will allow you in those moments to improvise together? And for me, that's part about that lost story, right?
Mhm.
So that's the sort of thing of these examples of I don't know what I'm doing and we're going to figure this out together. But but also I never was that mom that would tell their kid as they were about to get an injection, "Oh, don't worry, it won't hurt. Yeah, yeah, this is gonna hurt."
It's like the quickest way to break trust with your kid because your kid is like, you just lied to me."
Yeah. When are we gonna get there? In a long time. Right, "No, we are not almost there. Yes, it's gonna hurt." Um, but also, I've always been there. So, there's been this way in which I have, really tried to let them know that no matter what happens, I am so here. And they've been through stuff. Whew, have they been through stuff because their friends are going through stuff.
Mhm.
And I was also not that mom who kept promises, right? You get told by all the parenting books, keep your promises to your kids. And I was not that one. I would say, we're going to go to the park tomorrow. And then if it's raining, I'd say, we're not going to the park today.
Mm.
But you promised. Yeah, but it's raining. So let's respond to the complexity of our surroundings. Right? This is what you do in life. You respond to the complexity. You don't keep promises that are at difficult angles to what is happening. And so I always felt that the flexibility that they could have and being able to change their mind and see things that they didn't see before in the situation was more important. And that in
Mhm.
the end my credibility would be stronger if my kids could see me being able to respond. But that also means that when they had a situation and they made me a promise and the situation changed, I had to stop and say, "Ah, the situation changed. I see." So, but I think that piece is really important. Um, yeah, there's a piece in the book that I wrote for my kids that is about this.
Mhm.
And it's called Mama Now, and it is really about what it's like to be a mama now or a papa.
It's a beautiful piece. I remember when you read that to us during the warm data training, and, I don't know if you could see this, but I was literally crying through the entire thing. It was just tears streaming down
Mm.
my face just listening to that because I was just thinking about the impossible task of being a mother now to a child in the world that we're in and how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be ready to go on an adventure. And I think the assumption is that as the adult in the room, you've got to be the one in control, and you've got to be the advisor, and you've got to be the person that's holding the mast in the storm. And I think that if parents behave that way, they're going to leave their children alone in the storm.
Mm.
They're going to leave them alone. So, you know, the storm that they're in requires that we relax a little bit. This idea that we'll lose their respect if we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
They need to know that we don't know either. Otherwise, they're all by themselves out there.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing, right? Bring it all on, but know that I'm here with you, even if I don't know what to do either. And uh, I just don't want them to ever feel alone.
Mm. Well, I think we have come to the close of our conversation. And one of the things I love to ask all my guests in closing to keep this relational web going is this question of who would you like to platform? Or, in other words, who would you recommend I have on the podcast?
Ooh, 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 ooh. Well, let's see. I would like no, see, you probably already have had a lot of folks that I would love to see. But, um, what about Arundhati Roy?
Mm, that would be amazing.
Invite me, I wanna talk to her too, I love
Oh, that would be amazing. A conversation with both of you.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing.
She's
Do you know her?
I've never met her.
Okay. We
Um,
have to find someone who knows her who can make a connection for us.
yeah, and I think there's something really needed around the different tones and textures of the communication, and, because there's a way in which one tone is really credible, and it works like a lawnmower over
Mhm.
the other one. And yet in life we have to tend to this other form. So I think this question of what the tone is, and I love her tone. Another person whose work I think is interesting is Jeanette Winterson.
Mm.
So these are two people that I haven't seen on in the podcast circuit. So
Hmm.
be cool to
Thank you so much. This has been such a joy and such a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for all your wisdom. Thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you for your beautiful book. Combining, everybody, go out and buy it. I promise you, you will not regret it.
thank you. And thanks for inviting me and good luck with your podcast. It seems like it's going great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If you liked the episode and want to hear more conversations where we explore how a more beautiful world might emerge, subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app or the Entangled World Pod YouTube channel. If you loved it, support the project at patreon.com/Entangled World. Thank you for listening and for coming on this journey together.